You made it to level 2, deeper questions leading to deeper answers. I'm Tomas Garza, and I'm here to help you decide to transform. I'll be setting the pace for the process to support your unfolding. Learn and commit to a practice that brings simplicity and then awareness of what is ready to be released. Join me now and allow the experience of a deeper sense of love. Hello and welcome to Decide to Transform. I'm your host, Tomas Garza, and joining me as my very special guest today from Kingston, Ontario, is Kady Romagnuolo. Now, Kady is a board-certified NLP master practitioner and a coach who specializes in conquering fear, goal achievement, breaking the cycle of self-sabotage, and very interestingly for today's program, releasing negative ancestral and generational patterns, as in past life regression work, which we'll talk about here today. I'm excited about this. So Kady's online courses and one-on-one sessions are designed for busy entrepreneurs who are looking to boost their results and reduce stress, worry, and anxiety. Kady is also a best-selling author in mental and spiritual healing and is recognized for her advocacy work to support mental health for real estate professionals. As an experienced real estate broker, she has trained agents from across Canada. Kady, I'm looking forward to this. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. This is such an amazing podcast.
Well, thank you so much. This is fun. And, I'm really curious about the clearing ancestral patterns and generational patterns and past life regression. I know we have many things that we could talk about here on the show today, but let's start with that component. And my question is what is the story behind that? How did you get into this work?
Yeah, it's a really interesting story because 5 years ago, I would have never expected that I would be in the shoes that I am today. I never intended on being a coach. Back then, and for the last 13 years, I was a real estate agent and, working a career that I really loved. I had always said that I wanted to be a real estate agent since I was like 5 years old. So I would, sit in the church pews and be pretending to do floor plans and listing sheets and, the full gear. And I just always thought, that's what I wanted to do. So about 5 years ago, what happened was I'm within the peak of my career. I'm on the surface looking like somebody that, has everything going on, great house, good husband, good income, great career setting. But what nobody knew was I was struggling with a tremendous amount of anxiety on the inside. And, I grew up in a really rough neighborhood, went to one of the worst rated high schools in my area. And there was a lot that I was sort of carrying forward in life that I didn't realize. Now, obviously, that's not necessarily past life information yet. So, as I started, I had no awareness of past life regressions. I was, not something I was even interested in at the time back then. So, I'm trying to figure out how am I going to get through the feelings that I have each day. Honestly, I was leaving appointments and crying in my car all the way home. Mm-hmm. I was just a mess. And I would put myself together, put on sort of this fake mask of confident Kady instead when I got out of the car, and my clients didn't know, my colleagues didn't know, my husband didn't know. And I just really hid it very, very well. So the way the universe works, and I don't know about you, but for me, I most definitely have had the experience that the universe or God or whatever you believe in that's out there really will send you a message, over and over again until you get it. Right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And it's like, for me, I always talk about the jackhammer effect. So I had, these little knocks on the door every once in a while that, hey, something's not right in your life. You need to figure this out. And that was anxiety showing up for me and that feeling, right? Mm-hmm. But then I was pushing it away, pretending it wasn't there. So what happened is, as I started to make plans and goals and, scale my career, and we were looking to build our dream home and all these different things that logically should have worked by my step-by-step plan, they all started falling apart, and in big, big dramatic ways, to the point where in 2017, I was at nearly rock bottom, emotionally, physically, mentally, just financially. We had put so much into our plans and everything was falling apart. Every investment was going wrong.
Mm.
I showed up at a real estate conference that I was honestly forced to go to. Now, this was like a top producing event, and my whole team was there that I worked on, and really natural place that it perhaps should have been for someone in my position, but I had so much anxiety and fear of judgment, and that I just didn't want to be in front of my colleagues. So I tried every single possible way that I could to get out of that event, but the universe was not letting me. Because this was
Oh,
my first step to regression work and being a practitioner now. And I had no idea. There was no link between the two, right?
mhm.
And as I eventually ended up sitting in that conference room that day and being around all of my peers and having just so much anxiety to even talk to people, I thought I had social anxiety at the time,
Mm.
which was just a way of me putting a label on what was actually going on. And I ended up in a breakout session where we were doing like these smaller coaching groups and this little sort of uplifting seminar. And I thought I can hide in this little room with these people, not in the big setting. And again, the universe was not letting me get away with my same old stuff. So, what that room was all about was dealing with the stuff that's going on emotionally underneath the surface. So, our unconscious mind,
Okay.
right? And the
Yeah.
layers beneath. So, right now I am, a career coach that does everything in an unconventional way, uses all the tools that you would never expect are connected to achieving goals, because
Okay.
that's what happened for me. So in that room, I realized, okay, like I've got these serious feelings that are going on right now. Something's being triggered. I didn't understand why. It was in an energetic sense, quite honestly. The people in the room were just supportive people. I didn't even know it at the time, but they would be who my mentors and coaches would end up being in the years to follow for myself. And I ended up saying for the very first time out loud and to a stranger that I'm struggling with a lot of anxiety.
Okay.
And I remember those feelings coming with a lot of, I was holding back tears. There was a lot
Mm.
of shame and feeling like, I should be grateful for the life that I have, given where I've come from and the struggles that I legitimately went
Sure.
through. But I feel just a mess. A mess was the only
Mm.
word that I could say.
Okay. Mm.
Yeah. And so getting to the point where I could say that out loud was probably the biggest thing that ever happened for me to shift my life and deciding to change.
Mhm.
And
Yeah. Well, I can picture you there. Now, how did it feel when you said, "Okay, I'm a mess"?
yeah,
What,
it was
what
terrifying.
next? Okay.
It was absolutely terrifying because the underlining thing that was running that I didn't realize was this big fear of judgment. And fear of who, a stranger in front of me that's there in a coach capacity to help you work through exactly what it is that you have. So the fears that we have, the feelings that we have really self-sabotage us when we don't realize, right? Because we can't say yes to opportunities when we think they're a problem. I can't show that part of me that maybe I'm looking at as a weakness or a disadvantage at that point in my life, because it's holding me back and that fear is talking to me instead of what's best for me. And all I did was the first thing in front of me, right? So, what could I say yes to in that moment? And that was showing up to a weekend workshop that just talked more about the unconscious mind and, everything that's involved behind our thoughts and our
Mhm.
feelings.
Yeah.
And at that point in my life, I was really wanting to make a career change, but I wasn't telling anybody this. And the
Okay.
career change, yeah, was not out of real estate. I was just really trying to get out of the team setting I was on to, be more of a free spirit and build the business the way that I wanted to with my
Okay.
own vision.
Sure.
And I couldn't do that with that fear.
Mm.
So I ended up getting into my NLP practitioner training in order to get the skills that I thought I needed in a communication sense to really build that structure of the business.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what actually happened was I hit all of my emotional baggage in the process of training and pulled out all of those weeds and ended up realizing that there was some stuff going on that happened well before this lifetime.
Mhm.
And that's
Okay.
where the regression work started to come in.
I gotcha. Okay. Well, and this is during then your NLP training.
Yeah.
And so how did this show up? How did these past life events, we'll call them that, how do they identify themselves?
Yeah, great question, right? Because how do you make the leap from saying, I want to expand my career and actually achieve my goals? And hey,
Yeah.
that means I have a past life issue going on. Well, no, like the logical connection doesn't happen that easy, right?
Yeah.
And for me, that initial step was I had been having issues with my sleep.
Oh,
So I was
okay.
sleepwalking my entire life. From a child, I would do these really strange, erratic things in my sleep. I would end up in different rooms. I would be talking to people, having conversations with no awareness of it later because I was in full sleep mode. And it was sort of this regular weird thing that I did right into my adulthood. And what happened was when I met who would be my future husband, my husband Rob now, is I'm in college and I'm doing, my regular weird sleep stuff. And to me, it's normal, right? Because I've done it my entire life. But,
Yeah.
he's starting to spend more time with me and like realizing I'm doing these things in my sleep that are actually pretty dangerous. And I didn't realize it at the moment. So what was happening is I would wake up beside him, hovered over top of like his sort of like his chest area, and I would be doing almost like a motion of like chest compressions or
Oh,
like
oh,
some
wow.
sort of, yeah, it was this very strange
Mm,
thing and I couldn't stop myself from doing it. So he would wake up and he'd
mm.
realize like, and I wasn't physically touching him, I was hovering over him doing this, and he'd wake up, and of course, that's going to freak you out, right? Like the first time that
It would
that
be
that
a little
happens.
odd. Yeah.
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 And, this is where, I really feel I've got this soul connection with him where it didn't freak him out. It was kind of
Cool.
like, what are you doing? Let's
Mm,
figure this out.
mhm.
And the dangerous part about it was that, so I lived in a fairly rough area of downtown Toronto by myself as a young woman, no security in the building. And I actually slept with sort of like a makeshift weapon beside my bed, like just in case. And that
Okay.
was like the
Sure.
community I came from previous. So it was my life experience to just be
Mm,
prepared, right?
mhm, mhm.
And what was happening is he was worried, well, what if you accidentally, like grab that weapon that you have beside the bed here and you're doing these weird motions and like you're obviously in a state of fear as this is happening.
Yeah.
So this is happening on such a deep unconscious level. You're not even aware of what you're doing. And right away, it just like it freaked me out, right? Like, you're right. I never thought of that. So this became this journey of figuring out like what it is that I'm doing in my sleep. And the universe will present options for you as soon as you start asking questions,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yes.
what resource do I need? What do I need to figure this out? And I ended up being connected with a past life regression expert in another capacity. She was connected with the NLP coaches, and it just happened to be that she did this work, and I didn't even realize.
Okay.
And we sort of talked about some of these things that were going on, and she says, well, like, why don't we go into like a hypnosis state, see if we can go back into a lifetime that might
Mm.
identify what it is that these patterns are that you're doing within your life. Because this had been years. So at this point, I had been doing this motion for years and it was just really disruptive of my sleep. So we got rid of the weapon beside the bed, like it wasn't needed.
Okay.
And I just couldn't stop doing it. I'd wake up in mid motion in this state of fear, not understanding what I was doing.
Mm.
So I said yes, right? Like when you get to a point where it's like, okay, well, what could it hurt? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So in that regression, what ended up happening, and this is where my story really came to life for me because I am in the rock bottom stage of my life at this time in 2017 when I am trying to figure out why everything is falling apart. I had a beautiful house I was trying to sell that took us 3 years in a very hot real estate market to sell. And it was just so frustrating. So we're sitting there, we do the regression, and the results of that experience changed my life and the course of events that were leading up to who I am now forever, like in a very dramatic way.
Okay. Yeah. So say some more if you would about that. What happened? How did this change?
Yeah. So we ended up going back to a time where I was in, so from my experience, and for anyone who doesn't have any experience with past life regression, what happens is you go into this sort of deeply relaxed state where you're guided back to information that bubbles up from sort of your unconscious part of you, right? The part that's holding information. And this can happen differently for many people. For me, it was a very visual experience. It was as though I was there seeing through my own eyes. it can be more of a feeling, a knowing or information that comes forward for others. So for me, my eyes are closed, I'm deeply relaxed, and I go back to this stage where immediately I guess it was in the 1700s. So I can remember it like clear as day because it was like I was there. And this is where the big convincer of this work really happened for me is I couldn't have made up the events that happened if I had tried as quickly as they were coming forward. And I ended up being, in a family setting with my village at the time, all these years back. And the main events of what I walked through was that my family had actually their village was attacked, and their homes were burned to the ground.
Oh.
And I was the only one that survived that day. And one of the things that I was doing to try and protect or save the family was I was hovering protectively over top as the structure came down on my family member that day. And it was
Okay.
in that moment, it was the exact motions that I had been doing in my sleep here and now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So how did that feel to have that realization?
Yeah. In the moment, it was like experiencing being there. The emotion was real, like
Mhm.
tears, grief, sadness. It was as if I
Yes.
was there.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about awareness is it's almost like the awareness itself makes the shift. The knowing of the information makes a shift, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so honestly speaking, from that day on, when I came, out of hypnosis and, back into kind of my full state of where I was, and we talked it out a bit and said, like, look, this is exactly what I was doing in my sleep. This all makes sense now. I'm just sort of reliving this fearful state from another point in time and doing it around somebody that I now love as my, family. And what happened was from there, I never did that motion again.
Okay.
After 30 years of having that, now I still sleepwalk, but I do it in different capacities.
Oh,
And
you do?
yeah, I
All
do.
right. All
I'm a
right.
sleepwalker and sleep talker. And, I do a lot of things in my sleep, but the destructive, right? The thing that was keeping me awake, that was allowing me to have this fearful state that I couldn't get rid of, was actually resolved in having that knowledge. And, during session, like a skilled practitioner will really walk you through resolving the emotional issues that present in this lifetime. So you go back
Okay.
to heal, not just to get the information, but to heal how it presents as a problem now. So we sort of work through that as you come back to now.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, have you gone back then for many sessions since then?
Yeah, so I've had multiple sessions myself.
Hmm.
Now, as a practitioner of the work, I've done many sessions with clients, and it's fascinating to see what unfolds here and now in the current after these sessions.
Okay. Yeah. And I want to ask you about some of that. And from your own experience, then, it's a very strong visual of you hovering over a loved one, trying to protect them. And that was cured after just one session. So, what else has changed for you as a result of doing this work?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question because that particular session, what we then did was we sort of went forward in time. Like I had this
Oh,
confusion of why me, right? Like why did I survive in that setting
okay.
and the rest of the family perished?
Hmm.
And how do I use that and figure out what it is that I was meant to survive for? So we sort of traveled forward in time, and I was able to go back to a time where the purpose of my life was to really be a leader and a speaker, and seeing myself and talking about specific things to another village. And there was a purpose to my life at that time. And there were so many synchronicities between some of the options and opportunities that were presenting that I was saying no to in the current. And it really gave me a lot of confidence to say, like, I feel like I've actually experienced this before. I'm gaining this knowledge of this feeling of familiar to, being a
Yeah.
speaker and things like that. So
Right.
in terms of my confidence, like it really shifted how I viewed myself.
Okay. Yeah, and it's easy to see how that would translate into your career then
Yeah.
immediately. Okay. Well, and then you mentioned a few minutes ago that you had tremendous anxiety when you were younger and that you successfully kept that. You managed to keep that from everybody. Now, have the past life regressions and the work that you've done, has that gone to work and alleviated some of that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So, one of the things that we can do is go back to a time where a specific thing that is presenting as a problem rooted in. So, a lot of times that's an emotion. And emotions are often presented as ways of coping, and we don't realize that we're coping with something, right? By
Yes.
feeling a certain way.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so, going back to a specific time where anxiety initially rooted in for me was a really meaningful thing. And, also walking that forward in life in terms of like, where did those similar feelings show up initially in this lifetime as well? Like,
Okay.
where did I grab
Mhm.
onto them to say, hey, I know this feeling before. I've done this before. I'm going to run with it now for this lifetime.
Yeah. Familiar. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and then you went and it was rooted in the past, but then you began to notice ways that it was you were reenacting that. I guess that's the word that comes to my mind is
Yeah.
reenacting because it feels familiar.
Yeah, it's
Hmm.
kind of like muscle memory. And I often talk about this in a business sense of like how stress and worry are impacting your career really relates
Hmm.
to, that little part of our brain, the amygdala, that holds on to how we perceive emotions.
Yeah.
So think about that in such a like metaphysical context, right? Where we go out from what we know to be true in a linear sense here to say, okay, well, I had this experience as a child. And so therefore, yeah, I might feel that way about certain trigger points as an adult, but then take that knowledge and, superimpose it onto the fact that is there more than this lifetime? Is there, energy that carries forward from generations as well, from our ancestors that come forward within our bloodlines and not even necessarily energetically within our DNA? So that information
Yeah.
is so valuable and we don't have access to it in a conscious sense.
Okay. So how does one access this
Yeah.
subconsciously?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different routes, right? Like the past life regression is great for some very specific things. And then I also move through negative emotions on what I'll call like your timeline. So
Hmm.
timeline
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily mean again here and now. It could be generations back or, ancestors and past lives back as well. So
Hmm.
being able to get into a certain state within your mind that allows for that information to bubble up is the big part of the process. And
Yeah.
being relaxed, right? So in hypnotherapy, I'm certified with the American board, is really where those skills come into play in pulling that information out.
Okay. Well, it's very interesting because in your intro, you talk about removing negative ancestral and generational patterns. Now, there are some people out there that talk about that, but specifically, what does that look like? How do you do that
Yeah.
work?
Yeah. So when you think about, our ancestors, so whatever culture or, type of upbringing that you have, we all have ancestors.
Mhm.
And as we look down that line, we start to get disconnected from, the real personal effects of that particular line. So you may be able to remember your parents' parents, maybe your parents' parents from there, right?
Yeah.
But we start to get a disconnect because we don't have photographs sometimes, or we haven't seen visuals and we don't really get a heart-centered connection to it. But what happens is a big emotion shows up in life. So I'll give you an example of anger because anger is a really common one, right? We all get angry and to varying degrees. But what happens when you have, a small moment that happens in the day, like say somebody cutting you off in traffic and road rage, right? Like road rage is such a big thing that happens in our society. And oftentimes when I talk to people who have had road rage, they'll say, well, I get it. I shouldn't have been that angry. I was upset about something else. And, the anger just sort of bursts out on whatever it is that triggers. Now, that anger, chances are, and we know this on a conscious level, didn't start in that moment. Okay, it might have been irritating or frustrating, but like a big explosion would not have been warranted, probably. So, what happened before that? And sometimes people can trace it, a couple days ago, this happened or whatever. But then what happened before that and before that? And you start to get this sort of chain reaction that is building momentum on specifically anger. So when you can only get to going back into the womb now and you're starting your life and you have maybe a very first experience of anger as a child, there's more before that. When you think about women being, I think there's that saying that, myself as a daughter would have been in, my mother's basically forming of what her body created as eggs within her mother at the time of being in her womb.
Mhm.
So there's one generation back that we actually have a physical exposure to those cells.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So in an energetic sense, what I do with emotions is we go back to the, say, root cause of anger. It may not be anywhere close to where you think. It may have been 100 generations past. It may have been 100 generations past and 100 past lives past,
Mm-hmm.
because that energy does carry forward. And we tap into those memories and release specific emotions that have been building.
Okay. And then does one pinpoint or identify exactly the lifetime in the detail that you had where you were in the 1700s, or is it sometimes more nebulous than that?
Yeah. So it's very individual for everybody, right? So, it depends on, for myself, I get visuals a lot of the time. Sometimes, again, it's a feeling or a knowing. So when I do like specific negative emotions work, we don't necessarily focus on what the event was, because there may not be that much information to come forward. It's been so sort of diluted down, right,
Okay.
along the
Mhm.
timeline. So it can sometimes appear for people as like a dark spot. I feel
Hmm.
like I'm on a certain spot in my timeline. And this is, through deep relaxation. And there's a color here, or there's a blank spot here, or I know that I'm here, but I'm not sure why. And that kind of effect.
Okay. Yeah, it's very, it's very interesting that there are dark spots or blips. That was the first image and word that came to my mind. So, what does it look like then, or feel like to clear something that's generational?
Yeah, it's immediate lightness. So feeling
Okay.
like something has been lifted. And so one of the sessions, it's called quantum change process, that I,
Mm.
work very, very deep into some of these layers. And many of the feedback, the responses from clients that come back afterwards are that like immediately I feel physically lighter, but also just like a head clearing, right? So it's kind of like
Okay.
clearing out the stuff that
Yeah.
wasn't serving.
All right. Yeah. And then you immediately feel lighter. And then, so what have you seen then in your experience or your client's experience when you work with ancestral or family lineages, that sort of generational pattern? When one person does the clearing, then do you now see a general lightness spreading outward from them, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so I love that your questions are amazing. Like I
Oh,
love
thank
them
you.
because they're so on point for what happens next. And this is where we experience synchronicity or
Mm.
miracles, as I like to call
Yeah.
them. Sometimes it
Yeah.
feels like, right,
Mhm.
where a problem that maybe was occurring with a family member, a close friend, or a boss just doesn't occur the same way anymore, because the reactions are not the same. It feels like that person has had a change of heart, but really there's been a shift that's happened within you specifically. So this impacts not only the individual, but many times it's impacting everybody around in your closest circle and who you're interacting with on a daily basis. Life changes in big ways.
Okay. Well, and then, so at what point in your timeline, then 2017 was when you were first introduced to this at a conference that you didn't want to be at and tried every way you could to get out of it. And I love this, that the universe said no.
Yeah.
Um, I also have really identified with the jackhammer effect that you mentioned before. So, at what point did you begin then to work with clients after all of this?
Yeah, I said no for a long time. So I thought I
Mm,
did the work for me, right? I thought, okay,
mm,
I'm changing
mm.
my career, I need more confidence. And, this is just what I'm doing for me. And I literally was saying out loud. So I was done my master practitioner training, done all these things, gained such an amazing amount of benefit for myself that I was able to, switch gears and shift and move into my own business and change that
Yeah.
role. And within 6 months was incredibly successful. I hit the targets I wanted to. It happened effortlessly. I was like a brand new version of me again.
Okay.
And people started to notice. So I wasn't advertising that like I did this coaching training or anything like that, because it wasn't for that purpose. And people started noticing and saying, like, what on earth like happened, right? Like, how were you stuck over here for so long doing what, I would say out loud, I had other goals and dreams and things, but I never did anything about it, right?
Okay. Sure.
So the
Yeah.
action steps happened. 6 months later, all of a sudden, these amazing results happen. I hit my income, everything that I wanted. And people started to say, what are you doing? So I said, well, I did this and this and this. And then they'd say, well, can you do that with me? Like, can you help me as well?
Yeah.
And I started to think, at first I said, well, no, I don't work with clients. Over and over again, I said out loud, I don't work with clients. That's not why I did this.
Oh, gotcha.
And they kept asking, till finally a friend said to me, like literally shook me by the shoulders and was like, what are you doing? Like, you're great at this stuff. People want you to work with them. You love it. What are you doing? And in that moment, it was the first time I actually turned to myself and said, what are you doing? Like, well, why are you saying no to something you love?
Uh-huh.
And there began the process of me saying yes
All
and working
right.
with clients.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful because we can all relate to saying no to things we love. Why? Because we think we're supposed to do things the way that we were told or
Yeah.
trained or spent lots of time and money and professional certifications and degrees on and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to that. So now that you're involved in this, you've also written a book. So tell us a little bit about the book, if you don't mind.
Yeah, the book again was one of those things that I feel like it wrote me. Like it came through me, and
Mhm.
I never intended on being an author. It was not
Oh,
on my bucket list.
okay.
I previous to all of my coaching work and self-development, I hadn't even read a book in like decades. Like I was not in that flow,
All
and
right.
let alone knowing how to write. So what
Mm.
happened was, as I shifted out of all of this stuff, started coaching, and I looked back and I realized there's an incredible story here, like more than just going through a heartbreak and having goals fall apart, but some really metaphysical things happened to me in
Yeah.
the house that I was living in. And it shifted my perspective. And I tapped into a lot of repressed memories from childhood through
Mm.
having exposure to some of the things that I would dwell on and really think about.
Okay.
And so I wrote Home of the Soul last year. And because it felt like I had no choice, like I felt such a pull to do it, that it wasn't about if I was, good or not at writing, or if I could figure out how to do it, or any of the steps that came after. I just felt like I had to.
Hmm.
And I have an amazing publisher, Golden Brick Road Publishing House,
Oh, okay.
and Kylie, who is the founder, and she sat on a call with me and she fell in love with the story, and her, to just watch her eyes light up and to see where, everything that actually happened and how it was so connected on such a big level. And she
Hmm.
just believed in the story. And 6 months later, I was a published author who is now a bestseller in mental and spiritual healing on Amazon. And I'm blown away every day by it.
Mm. Oh, congratulations on that. That's amazing.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah. It's really wonderful. And the title of the book, then, Home of the Soul. All right. What's behind the title? What's the significance for you?
Yeah, so it's the true tale of the mystic encounters that happened that awakened my spirit. So
Okay.
created who I am today. And
Mm.
Home of the Soul is really like a play on two different things. So being a real estate agent and, being in a home that I had so much love for, but so many events that happened that weren't allowing us to stay in this space. I felt like that I was being pushed out of it and trying to sell for 3 years, and that being part of the reason why I felt like I physically was stuck there,
Mhm.
is what then cracked everything open in my heart for me to, have that jackhammer. It was like a jackhammer on my heart and my soul, right? That just
Okay.
blew it all open. And coincidentally, what happened, or not coincidentally, was I really found myself in that home. And not only that, did I find where the source of my, soul traits and purpose and everything was, by being stuck there. and being
Mm.
forced to deal with my demons.
Okay. Yeah. And the universe was saying, okay, here you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, and it's so interesting the way that we try to resist this flow and resist this plan and this energy. And it's just a very resonant term and a strong visual, the jackhammer effect, where the
Yeah.
universe tries to get our attention again and again until we finally show up and listen. So, Katie, what would you say to people that are listening that might be interested in this kind of work, but maybe a little skeptical? Like, this is not exactly something that they're familiar with, and maybe they're thinking about it, but not
Hmm.
sure.
Yeah. So remember, like we said, options present when you need them. So chances are,
Hmm.
if you're hearing about it, regardless of what your internal feelings are, there might be something just there for you. And I know that when I first did my regression, so I come from a very religious background. I had a good faith base. I believe in God. There's,
Hmm.
some things that I needed to sort of sort out in terms of my beliefs to move forward to where I am now. And the thing about past life work is you really do not have to know or believe that you have past lives in order to get resolution now.
Okay.
You absolutely do not. And think of the mind as, in terms of psychology in a logical sense, the mind will experience an event, say be worried that a certain appointment's coming up. And so now I'm worried about it. You're experiencing it in your mind, almost like a movie, right? Like a
Mm.
disaster film that
Yeah.
could potentially happen.
Yes.
Well, that then creates how you're living your life now. It influences your actions, your behaviors, right? Well,
Hmm.
think about in that same context where what if you went through a visualization process that connected you to the missing parts of what you didn't realize was there in your thought patterns and connected them as a movie to experience healing? So
Mm.
visualization we know works. There are studies that prove through, even sports performance that visualization of practicing something in your mind rather than physically doing it will increase your odds of success dramatically. And that's scientific fact. So regardless of belief, there's ways of moving through this information by scientific fact.
All
So,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So scientific fact, and there's so much information out there about this very thing, and there's so many different techniques that are available to people. And I want to echo something that you just said because I agree. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are there's a reason. In fact, we know there's a reason, and so do you. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
say that. So,
Yeah. Take this
yeah.
as your sign.
Yeah, take this as your sign. Because there's a lot of fact to this, and I love the image of a movie. Again, a movie to experience healing. So, yeah, what else would you say to somebody that's maybe still a little bit on the fence?
Yeah. So do the one thing that you're thinking about not doing. Right.
Hmm.
So maybe that's ask some questions, connect with me to figure out, is this something that would make sense for me with what I'm experiencing in my life? And just ask some questions because you won't know if it's right for you or not unless you ask.
You won't know until you try. So then, if someone's curious, how can they get a hold of you to find out more information about this?
Yeah, so I'm everywhere online, Facebook, Instagram. I absolutely love. So Kady Mindset Coach is my Facebook, first and last name, Kady Romagnuolo for Instagram. My website, you can also connect with me there, which is just kadymindsetcoach.com. And Kady is a little unconventional, spelled Kady, as in David.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Connect with
All
me
right.
there anywhere online. I'd love to answer your questions.
Okay. And it's Kady, Kady, mindsetcoach.com. On Instagram, it's your name, Kady Romagnuolo, and Kady Mindset Coach, then on Facebook. Yeah. And, I think that this is something that will generate a lot of questions for people because not everyone has been through a process like this. So before we wrap up here today, Kady, what else would you have to say for listeners in general here?
So I love to work with conquering fear, right? So today, if you're
Yeah.
listening, if there's something that you've been avoiding in your life for fear of it, fear of judgment, or fear of what will
Mm.
happen next, or I don't know what's going to be the next step after that, make one step towards it today. If that's asking a question, make one step towards it. If it's saying yes to something, just make that one step towards it because it really could shift your entire life.
Yeah, one step at a time. And again, guys, if you're curious to work with Kady, she's an expert in her field and a best-selling author. So you'll want to pick up the book Home of the Soul as well, which is available on Amazon, right? And anywhere that you would buy books. And Past Life Regression, Clearing Generational Trauma, generational patterns, healing. It has worked wonders in Kady's life. And well, we're confident that it can work wonders in yours as well. But first, you have to get a hold of Kady and see if this is right for you and how you go about doing it. So, Kady, thank you so much for joining me here today. This has been a really wonderful conversation. I've learned a great deal. It's been a pleasure to have you on today.
Oh, thank you so much for having this platform. It just gives the ability to give the information, which is what we need right now.
Right. It is information. And one of the beauties of that is you never know who may be listening. So if you're listening here, get a hold of Kady on Facebook at Kady, Kady Mindset Coach, or on Instagram, Kady Romagnuolo, and KadyMindsetCoach.com. All right. This has been Decide to Transform. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. And Kady, thank you so much again for joining me.
Thank you.